Welcome to the Medical Device Regulation training session. During this session, we're going to go over the medical device regulation history, an introduction, the changes that have been implemented, and then a summary. Prior to the MDR, there were two directives in place which were implemented in 1990 and 1992. These defined essential requirements, they harmonized standards, introduced conformity assessment procedures, and organize market surveillance functions by competent authorities and notified bodies. These directives had some weaknesses, and new technology and changes in medical science required additional legislation. That's why in May of 2017, new formally published regulations, which will be fully implemented by 2020, have been put in place. The MDR final document promoted a life cycle approach, which is mirrored after the US FDA and other international standards. This life cycle approach incorporated the European Medical Device Vigilance System into the regulation. Since they are not legally binding, integrating them into the MDR reduces the flexibility in interpretation by industry. Notified bodies will have stricter qualification requirements and be under stricter supervision. There will be a greater emphasis on clinical data and clinical evaluations. Using equivalence, which is currently used to justify references to studies done with other devices, will be more rigorously interpreted and will be a more difficult way to demonstrate clinical safety or performance. For implantable Class 3 devices, clinical investigations will be expected, as the equivalence approach will generally not be accepted. A new regulatory body called the Medical Device Coordination Group has been created in order to concentrate the harmonization efforts between the European member states. The objective is to foster cooperation between the member states while at the same time increasing the Commission's power to act as needed in acute cases. Some new concepts have been introduced in the MDR. The introduction of strict rules for clinical investigations and alignment to the clinical trials regulation. Carcinogenic substances, which have a high risk on the human body, can only be used together with a strictly defined justification. And there's also been a new special procedure introduced for notified bodies for certain high-risk devices. Also, the introduction of manufacturer's liability. Single-use device reprocessing is only allowed under specific conditions, including permission by the member state. There have been many details added to the procedures for the vigilance and post-market surveillance, and the fact that they must be used for ongoing conformity assessment of the device. Also, the rules for designation of notified bodies have tightened. Medical devices and active implantable medical devices both fall under MDR. The regulation commences with an explanatory memorandum and with recitals that are explanatory in nature, not legally binding. The regulation consists of 92 pages plus 83 pages of annexes, and it is further organized into 10 chapters with articles. Now we're going to discuss the scope of the legislation. Article 1 of the MDR states that medical devices, their accessories, and the products listed in the annex will be referred to as devices. No exception is made for products without a medical purpose that will be considered medical devices, and therefore their accessories will also fall under the scope of the MDR. Another significant addition was with the definition of a medical device. Devices for cleaning, disinfection, or sterilization of devices will be considered medical devices. Previously, these accessories to medical devices were not covered within the directive. The legislation also covers in vitro diagnostics in order to align the MDR and the in vitro diagnostic device regulation. The term standalone software has been removed and replaced by software with a medical purpose. in which case it will fall within the scope of the MDR. And the classification rules now refer to software that drives a device or influences the use of a device. We are now going to discuss commercializing on the market. This chapter describes the roles of the authorized representative, the distributor, and the importer. It describes the complementary but incompatible roles of the AR and the two other economic operators, distributor and importer. Distance sales are regulated in such a way that devices sold to European citizens through the internet also have to comply with the regulations. Chapter 2 also provides measures to ensure that an injured patient can claim damage for defective products. It also outlines the educational and experience requirements for the person responsible for regulatory compliance. And it requires the manufacturer to supply competent authorities with all information necessary to demonstrate conformity, as well as to share that information with patients or their representatives claiming compensation. Chapter 2 also addresses reprocessing of single-use devices. It may only take place under strict conditions and where permitted by national law. Full product liability is placed on the reprocessor, while the original manufacturer will no longer be mentioned on the label, but will still be on the indications for use. Sterilization procedures will either have to comply with the requirements of the quality system or product verification with notified body involvement regarding the sterility. General safety and performance requirements are also included. And a reduction of risk as far as possible is explained as reducing risk without adversely affecting the risk-benefit ratio. The following requirements regarding the design and manufacture were added: devices incorporating materials of biological origin, and devices incorporating a medicinal product, and devices composed of substances or combinations of substances intended to be absorbed or locally dispersed in the human body. Also, construction of devices and interactions with their environment, software in devices and software that are devices in and of themselves, particular requirements for active implantable devices, and risks concerning medical devices for laypersons. There will now be labels on products that they are medical devices, and there will now be databases which will be publicly available with only certain proprietary information unavailable. Overall, the largest change relates to notified bodies and their role, as opposed to being an industry partner, now become more of an extension of the market surveillance apparatus. Notified bodies will now be required to have liability insurance. They will have to be accredited by the authority responsible, and the authority will provide a review. There have also been a few classification changes, which you can see below. A few types of products have changed classification. Conformity assessment has been simplified. Notified body audits and assessments should occur at least annually. Notified bodies will perform unannounced inspections at least once every 5 years. And the notified body will be mandated to test samples from the production or manufacturing process. Demonstrating equivalence will now fall under more stringent criteria. The informed consent and protection of vulnerable populations gets special attention, and the role of clinical evaluation and clinical investigation has become more prominent. This data system must have data concerning clinical investigations entered, and it must also be used for post-market clinical follow-up studies. And the design, execution, and requirements for such studies must meet many requirements applicable to clinical investigations. Post-market surveillance will be used for deciding preventative and corrective actions, and manufacturers are required to report serious incidents. The EU database will share with the member state where the incident occurred, member states where the FSCA was undertaken. For FCSAs, the member state where the manufacturer or their AR is based, and all vigilance reports to the NB. Confidentiality will be maintained, but patients seeking compensation will get access to detailed information. The new standard has an implementation date of May 26, 2020, but certificates issued under the current system will be valid until they expire. In summary, the new EU MDR will implement more control over high-risk devices, changing of risk classification for diagnostic medical devices, increased transparency and traceability, and will require an implant card to be provided to patients that contains information on their implanted medical device. In conclusion, it is important to remember that there will be no grandfathering of devices, and manufacturers will have 2 years to recertify their devices. For more information, please use the link provided. Your feedback is valuable for helping us improve future training sessions. In order to receive a training certificate, please complete the survey at the link provided. Thank you very much.